A very warm welcome to Season 5. So great to have you listening in. And if this is your first time, an extra special welcome to you. We've got a great season lined up. My guest today, Susan Gold, is someone I could have multiple interviews with and still not explore all the incredible facets of grief and trauma she has endured. So I want to begin by recommending that you go and grab a copy of her book, which we will have all the details of in the episode notes, because like her name, it is gold. And in fact, I have a confession to make. This is our second interview together. As the first one, I lost most of Susan's audio, so that doesn't make for a great episode. So here we are doing round 2. So I'm just going to trust and believe that there is a reason for that. I'm very grateful to you, Susan, for allowing me to snuffle some more of your time. So welcome.
Oh, Helen, it's a privilege to be with you in your presence. And I've listened to several episodes of your podcast, and what you're producing is so wonderful and necessary. And I'm grateful that you are playing the role that you are on this great planet. Thank you.
Oh, Susan, thank you so much for that feedback. Oh, that warms my heart to hear that you really feel that, because I think when listeners hear your journey, they're going to understand why I am talking to you, because you've got so much to share with us. So before we get into that, I just wanted to start by something really fun. And we're going to go back to when you were 25, newly sober, with barely 3 months savings in the bank, and you decided to open your own talent brokerage firm. So how did you manage to get your first A-lister on there for your
Well, I
client?
opened that firm, Helen, because I had been sexually harassed in the workplace, and I was training people on the side to make extra money. And Barbara Walters became one of my clients. And I rang her doorbell at 7 a.m. and she said, "Susan, get in here. Like, what is going on with you?" And she was a great interviewer for a reason. And within moments, she had me telling her that I had been sexually harassed in the workplace. And she said, "I'm coming with you to work this morning and we're going to confront this man together." And I'm like, "Well, Barbara, I'm going to be okay, I'll handle it." I did confront my boss and he promptly fired me. And that's how I ended up launching my own talent brokerage firm. Barbara offered me an assistantship for her then fiance, but I said, "No, I can't be an assistant anymore after what I've experienced. Thank you so much." So Donnie Deutsch, who's an entrepreneur and a television host now, was running his dad's ad agency then. And somehow we were connected. And he said, "I really want Andy Warhol for my Pontiac client. Do you think you could get him to do a commercial for us?" And I said, "I'll try." And, back then we didn't have internet. Can you believe it? And I couldn't get anyone to pick up the dang phone at the factory, which was in the Murray Hill section of New York City. And I lived on the Upper West Side. So I literally left my apartment, took the subway down to Andy's brownstone, knocked on the door, and Andy's business manager, Fred, answered the door. And he listened to why I was there patiently. And he said, "Okay, come back tomorrow and I'll let you talk to Andy." So I waited in the foyer the next day. I was so nervous, Helen. I was just so nervous. And the double doors flew open. It was dark inside this room. It was Andy's studio. And I was scared to go in there. I thought, what is going to happen now? But there was a pin spotlight coming down on this platinum hair that was going 17 different directions. And there he was. He was scribbling away with colored pencils. And there were 3 pugs, those little dogs with the
Yep.
smushed faces, running around the studio, grabbing his pants leg. Like, I'm yammering on and on about why I'm there. He pays me no attention. It's all about the dogs. And then finally, he stops and he looks over at me for the first time. And he said, "Now, really, why should I do this?" And I just stopped and I took a breath and I said, because you can have the pugs in the shot with you.
Wow.
And he said, okay, I'll do it.
And you had no idea, did you, that you could actually have the pugs in the shop, but you were just going to make it happen?
I had no idea. I was praying Donnie was like going to say yes once I got back to him on the deal, and he did say yes. He was over the moon. He still claims that deal as one of the best he ever made. And it certainly positioned me for more of the same types of matching celebrities with brands and then working with celebrities ultimately in TV and film.
Gosh, that is such a wonderful story. And what a great way to start your own business, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest, though, there was a lot of probably stressful times and moments before that, thinking, how on earth am I going to make this work and happen? But when you pulled that off, whoa.
Being newly sober, your own method of operating is now defunct. I
Yeah.
needed that drink as an extension of my being, and I couldn't rely on that any longer. So it was very difficult. And I lived in a little studio apartment, and there was a restaurant in the building behind mine that I looked right into, a brick wall, and you could get the smell of the restaurant coming through. And
Mm-hmm.
I would have to like do one of those tilt up and lift your head through the cracks in the skyscrapers to see what was going on weather-wise. I was so lonely, but I would make myself make 50 cold calls a day, and I would mark them down on a little pad as if like I was a good girl earning something from Santa, to do these 50 cold calls. That was the magic number. And within 18 months, I had earned six figures and was known
Wow.
for matching celebrities with brands. So I guess it was destiny.
Yeah. Destiny and a lot of hard work. Let's not, just give destiny all the kudos to this because I think there's something about you and your spirit which we're going to get into. So let's go back to your earlier years because that's a time and many of us have carried stuff over from our childhood into our adult lives to varying degrees, and we often don't realize the impact that that stuff has on us. It's things like anger, shame, abuse, and always like being the victim and not liking who you are. So I think it's really important to hear your story of what your childhood was like because you had, gosh, my heart goes out to you because what you had was a childhood. I don't even know how you survived, yet you came out stronger than ever. So let's share what your childhood was like.
Well, it was certainly challenging. And I have three brothers and a sister. We all have a different experience of growing up in that home. My father's a genius astrophysicist. He was really fun, but he was also an alcoholic, a womanizer, and he was a narcissist, in my opinion. And my mother had five children in very short succession by the time she was 30 years old. And she had a Peter Pan for a husband, and she soothed by overeating. And back then, they prescribed diet pills for that issue, which she was on. And in my 20s, Helen, I realized, oh, diet pills, that's speed. So she also had a little struggle with mental illness in my belief system. She could be so loving and caring and then switch on a dime, and I would be beaten and didn't know why, almost to the point of passing out. And it was repetitive, and it wasn't a safe environment. There was a lot of screaming. Like almost by the time I was a teen, I thought if I'd hear anybody's voice raise, I'd split in two. And it was very competitive because there was not a lot of room for love. And when those scraps were doled out, believe me, we fought like vipers for them. Um, it was tough, but I didn't I knew that the home was unsafe. I knew I needed to get out. I knew that needed to be my focus. But there was also a lot of fun too. And I didn't know any better. It wasn't until my early 20s that the red flags in my own life started to appear that I realized, oh, something's like not right. And yeah, I walked into a therapist's office who was referred, and I give myself a lot of credit because back then it wasn't cool to wear your mental health on your sleeve. Let's just say that. And
Yeah.
I said to this gentleman as soon as I walked in, my life is out of control and completely unmanageable. He immediately started talking about, was there alcoholism in my family lineage? How much did my father drink? Did I drink? How much did I drink? And I said, really? Like, I have very serious problems. Alcohol is not one of them. I'm happy when I drink. And
Mm.
he said, well, for now, you'll not drink while you're in treatment with me, and you need to go to meetings to learn about your father's alcoholism. And you need to go to other meetings to learn how his alcoholism affected you as a child growing up, which was a very clever way for him to get me sober, but also to learn about the family dynamic and what I learned in that system.
Yes. Gosh. Now let's go back because you mentioned perspective, how you and your siblings all saw that situation from a different perspective. And I think that's really, really important because I've heard people talk about trauma and, how they embed it depends on their degree of sensitivity to what is happening around them. And you are an empath. And so I imagine you were just embedding everything tenfold, what was happening around you, rapidly putting things into place. Would that be a fair statement?
Oh my goodness, Helen. I mean, I have memory. I was barely 2, and I remember being in the playpen much longer than I wanted to be there or could tolerate, and then being met with beating. I feel the heat of tears, and I feel the pain. Yeah, I was very attuned, highly attuned to what was happening. My oldest brother, who has horrendous abuse, his childhood is almost completely blacked out. When I see him and if I jar memories, he can start to piece it together, but most of it is complete amnesia. My sister thinks she had a charmed childhood, lovely life. So, yeah, it really varies, but being empathic, yes, that gave me a very unique experience, I would say.
Yeah, I know from my own experience growing up, I was the youngest of five, and then we had siblings in the equation as well. And yes, and I just agreed when I was older that we would just agree to have different perspectives on what our childhood was like because I would come up with stuff and then my sisters would look at me like, what? What are you talking about? Because it wasn't in their view. And there was also my brother between myself and my older sisters. So, there was a little bit of an age difference and I don't know how much that impacted, but it all comes into the equation. So, when you had that type of stuff happen, you learn from a very young age to put very good coping mechanisms in place. And you've described a couple of them already. What do you feel that you took from your home life and your teen into your adult life? Or like you left home as soon as you graduated the next morning. So, what coping mechanisms help?
Well, on the plus side, I took a real independence. It
Mhm.
was drilled into me that no one was going to be my backup, that I was going to have to care for myself once I left that system. And so a real sense of independence was a positive, my intuitive capability, my willingness to be compassionate and feel compassionate as an empath for others. Those were all the pluses. But on the other side of that coin, the minuses, I took a very battered sense of self-esteem
Yeah.
and self-worth and a very little self-care, very little self-love without achievement from the outside in. So I didn't really understand from the inside out. And I was emotionally numb. I mean, when I went into therapy initially, I knew happy, sort of, mad, sad, and glad. But any more emotions that are any more delicate or teased out than that, I wanted a list. It was so difficult because I was so shut down to my own being for my own safety. And then that's what I knew. And that's how I lived for quite a while.
You also mentioned that your mum used to cope with overeating, and your dad, he used alcohol a lot. So let's talk about magnified abuse, because that was present on both sides, and you have a great way of explaining that.
It was hurt and damaged children, raising hurt and damaged children. I mean, my mother was horribly abused. She was molested by the parish priest. Her father was beaten almost to the point of death when he was a child by his stepmother. And that was the initial impetus for his struggle with mental illness and psychotic episodes. And he would beat my mother, and then she would have to pretend that it was all fine and it was all her fault and carry that. So she carried that into the marriage. My father's father was a Peter Pan. He really didn't want children, but for his mother, my father's mother, that's what you did. You had children, and she had 2 sons, and for the father, there was nothing they could do that was good enough. They couldn't measure up, and my father couldn't imbibe in history and music. He was sent on a scientific track where it's safe, and hide all that stuff in compartments and shellac it into place with alcohol. So, that understanding, Helen, that it's in our family ancestry. There's toxicity in the family line that carries through on a cellular level, gave me a way to separate and to have great compassion for who my parents were and what they were carrying and the roles they played. And I believe that's been really pivotal for my healing. I mean, I had to go deep and feel the rage and feel the anger and feel the injustice, but I ultimately could come full circle and understand their trajectories and where they were coming from.
Yeah, and it's generation after generation of putting on masks to show others that on the outside everything is okay, but on the inside it's actually chaos. And so we carry that through. So when you went to see the therapist, you've been carrying a lot of that through, a lot of those masks. And then it's like you had to start taking them off, didn't you? And it's not an easy process.
And it is a process. It almost seems like every decade there was a new theme. Like there was a decade for alcoholism, there was a decade for handling suicidal and clinical depression. And then there was a decade for really uncovering narcissistic abuse and walking through that and standing up to it ultimately. Yes, it's a process.
You had something that you mentioned that you had right from when you were very young, though, that I think has been pivotal in how you managed to deal with that over all of these years and actually be so successful in your business life. And that was you had an inner sense of knowing. There was just this knowing inside of you. So no matter what was happening around you, you could still believe that there was something better for you. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that inner light, right? I think we all have it. I think we come to the earth with it. For me, I feel like it's a piece of my soul, you know? There's a big
Yeah.
part of my soul that's on the other side rooting me on, but there's a piece of my soul inside my heart, that flame, that glow. And I always connected with that and stayed connected. And I knew intuitively that was essential for my well-being and for my ability to walk through the experiences that I was having. I mean, I've come to believe that Earth is a big schoolroom for soul evolution if we broaden our perspective and can see it that way. It seems to make more sense for me, the experiences that we have here.
Yes. I That's very, very powerful because I think that we're in an age right here and now where we get to heal what has happened in the past for our parents and for their parents and so on through the generation. And I think that's a very, very important time for us. But it just means that we actually have to face up to a lot of stuff that's happened to us and be brutally honest. And that's a hard thing to do when you put on so many masks and dampened it down. Like you talk about your brother having no memories of his childhood, and until he can actually start to get there and make peace with that, resolve that, there's always going to be a part of him stuck with that. So yeah, I just think it's just having this massive understanding. So you also talk about in your book the importance of your inner child and acknowledging that that is part of you. And I love the inner child. So take it away.
Helen, I'm giggling, I'm glowing with delight. The inner child was first introduced in my mid 20s when I started my journey after I got clean. And there was a very popular book out at the time by Alice Miller called Drama of the Gifted Child. It was even planted in popular movies. It sort of became a fad to read it at the time. And I learned a lot about it, but it always felt like, oh, poo poo. I don't have really a lot of time to mess around with that inner child stuff. That's good for some, but I've got deals to find and make, and I've got programs to produce and this and that to take care of. But when it really came back full force was after I walked through a really tough divorce from one I perceived to be a narcissist. That's when those layers came off of duct tape and Gorilla Glue and piss and vinegar and dirt came off my heart. And that's when I could connect deeply with this beautiful being within me, little Susie, who's so magical. And honestly, she's had a rough ride of it. I've ignored her. I've pushed her under the carpet. I've doubted her wisdom and ability. And now to come full circle and have little Susie acknowledged and appreciated from my core has just been magical.
And it's to know that we were born as these perfect, pure little souls. And then life hit us. And that's how we were molded. But we were born perfect. And, I wish everyone who is suffering pain could understand that they are perfect as they are. The way they look, the way they talk, they dress, the way they live their life. You are perfect as you are, exactly as you are meant to be. And it's understanding that, this is a journey that you're going through. And if you just believe in that, know that actually you're not shameful or all of those other terms that people will happily put upon us. Yeah, and I think it's so, so important to understand. So, what I want to examine with you now is how did you realize love was a key, that loving yourself was so important? and then loving others. Because it's easy to love others, but I think it's difficult to actually love ourselves.
Well, that's certainly been my experience, Helen. And I had to have a brutal billboard fall on my head to really get that on a visceral level. I walked through an experience that it was perfect storm. It brought together the tools I learned in my childhood to survive, the skill set I had, as a single entrepreneur making it happen in the entertainment industry through production and standing up in those big arenas. And also, all the toil of the depression. But I had long-term meditation retreats where I held silence too. That came in the brutal tenacity and focus of those endurance events that I completed. They all came into play in one incident. And once I walked through that, it was like I finally gave myself the credit that others had given me for decades. You're so strong. You're so capable. You're so aware. I didn't feel that. I was codependent in second grade, and Billy Fritz, I had to have the approval and the attention of some boy in some form. And it finally fell off and down, and it was an excruciating initiation. But I feel like that was one of the main life lessons I entered to experience. And all that I walked through was a part of that movie ultimately. And I'm so grateful for it. And that's what led me to self love. Not, placing third in my age group at Escape from Alcatraz or winning another gold medal at some, a swim event or another national
No.
ranking. No.
Yeah, they're all external things, aren't they? And often we hang on to those so strongly, and we don't realize actually when we look within, it's all there within us if we're loving ourselves and being kind to ourselves and feeling that we're worthy. But that's a hard thing to do. I mean, you were so clever and so talented and had these amazing achievements. You still didn't believe until a long way down your journey. So let's talk about that, because you mentioned earlier, each decade seemed to be something that you were unraveling. And I think that's a key to it. I think sometimes when we get to that point where we feel like we need to seek help or heal ourselves, we don't realize, we expect it to be instant. We think we're going to go and speak to a therapist or go and do some type of modality, and that's going to be it. We're going to be cured. It is literally an unraveling process, isn't it? And I think it's as your body can only cope with so much. So you release the top layer. And then when your body's safe enough, another layer comes up to be released. Was that your experience?
I'm really glad you're touching on the body, Helen, because that's been key. It was really important for me to get the black and white of the story out verbally with a professional. I also, journaled and obviously wrote a book on my personal and professional trajectory. But ultimately, what was so important was to go into my body and explore those pockets of trauma that I was holding on a cellular level and really were tangibly like, was it past? Was it present? Was it way back in the ancestry? It color was it? What was the texture? What was the emotional feel? And then to clear it, release it, and replace it with golden light. That's what's really and truly shifted me and my neural pathways to really now be living in a new zip code. I mean, yes, literally and physically, I live in a new zip code, but emotionally as well. Yeah.
And it's like Bessel van der Kolk's, yes, when the body keeps the score. Oh my goodness me, does it what? And that's what a lot of us don't realize when we, don't recognize those emotions, don't allow ourselves to feel that emotion and just damper it down within us. It's going to play out somewhere down the line.
Oh,
And
definitely. Yeah, definitely. I went from all that endurance athleticism to not being able to walk
yeah,
around my block. And I had a severe hip impingement and I spent 2 years in chronic pain. And I wouldn't go the traditional Western route because of my age. They would have just inserted titanium, and I'm not interested in that. So I didn't focus on pathology. I focused on the muscle and brought that hip back to life. Literally, it was frozen. It was almost like half my body wanted to exit the planet. And it's a big joint. It takes a long time to really work through it all, but it wasn't just physical. It was very emotional and there was a spiritual component. So I came at it from all different levels to be able to hike and walk and bike again.
did that come as a surprise to you when your body started breaking down like that? Because you are actually a phenomenal endurance athlete. It's been decorated many times over. You've done marathons, triathlons, and the treacherous escape from Alcatraz event where you finished third in your age group. I mean, those are phenomenal achievements. And so typically when you're training for those events, you know your body well and you're able to manage a lot of the niggles that come up and arise. So did it hit you out of the when your hip went on you?
I had inklings. The reason I went from marathoning to triathloning was because there were so many injuries coming up with all the running. I thought, "Oh, I'll
Mm.
spread it out over 3
Okay.
sports. That's the answer." And then
Uh,
when yeah, and then when the 3 sports, got too much, "Oh, well, I'll just focus on master swimming." And within 4 years, training like an NC2A athlete, and I was 50 years old, I had a national ranking too, but no, honestly, I was hiding. I knew I was hiding. I didn't wanna deal with my day unless I could go with my training regimen, and honestly, the universe will not let me get away with it.
yeah, that's good to recognize because so often we think, oh, I've got this happening, I'll go externally, get it fixed, and not actually make the connection. What's happening within me? What needs to come out? What do I need to look at? So I'm very, very pleased that you brought that up. So one of your greatest challenges happened with your marriage disintegration. You alluded that you were married to a narcissist, but you attracted that person to you in ways, and he actually was a bit of a mirror of your dad, wasn't
Well, my goodness, yeah, I thought I went to LA, Helen, for a great career move, but really it was to meet my greatest guru, who is my ex-husband, and guru in the meaning of teacher. I thought I met my Prince Charming and, went along for years. It was years I felt I was starting to feel drained, especially after we had our son and I had bought the family home and was feeling stressed with the mortgage and the taxes and the new setting and just feeling like I was starting to clunk and hiss from the weight, carrying the weight. And finally, I wanted to make him fiscally responsible. And we went into mediation to create an agreement, a postnuptial agreement to bring some kind of integrity into the relationship. And we got to the last point, and I thought, my marriage is saved. Even though I knew it was past its expiration date, I was going to do everything I could, to keep this together. And he folded his arms and his eyes went in those cold lizard like slits. And he said, I'm hiring an attorney and I'm filing for divorce. And that intuitive voice at that moment came over my shoulder and through my being to say, this is the universe doing for you what you cannot do for yourself. And we went back to our home, and He immediately took up court in the master, and I, by choice, took a mattress on the floor across the house into a partial conversion in our garage. And I made that space my monastery for 1 year, and I held no contact, including no eye contact with someone that I loved. And it was excruciating, but I kept repeating that mantra, this is the universe doing for you what you cannot do for yourself. I took a deep dive into my own being and really scoured my being to understand why I attracted this, why I chose this. And within a calendar year, I could write him his 6-figure check and he could move on to his next source of supply. And he is my greatest guru because he finally taught me my worth, my value, my capability. And that was the opening of my heart that I authentically needed in this lifetime.
I love that you're able to turn that around because it's so easy to get caught up in that and become so bitter and twisted and no, you're not going to have this and that. So it took great inner strength and wow, that's why I'm in awe of you. But you also have a beautiful 17. Is he 17, your son? You have a beautiful son. Yeah.
Yes, he is now 19 and
19.
he's, yeah, working his way through college here. Usually it's 4 years, but he's going to get through in 3. He's very
Wow.
bright. I'm very excited for the future that he has ahead of him. I think he's going to make a great contribution to this planet.
How how did your parenting change with him, knowing what you had experienced? And that, do you think that, the relationships you attracted, and then especially the one with your ex-husband, do you think that it impacted him and were you able to counter that? Did you have to really consciously work on doing it?
Yeah, it certainly impacted him, and I was horrified that he had to witness what he did with his mother and his dad living in the same circumstance, domicile. I don't even call it a home, and not speaking to each other. I mean, just awful. But what it taught him was to see clearly through circumstances and to speak up, to stand up. I think the last 2 months were really tough for my ex-husband because he saw that there was no exit point. He couldn't rewind. He was going to have to walk all the way through this, and he became more desperate and unfortunately acted out on my son some of that desperation. So it was really troubling to see my son experience that, but ultimately it's made him a stronger being and human being, and he has a relationship with his dad today, which I'm grateful for. I'm grateful that
Yeah.
they have a relationship, but I was terrified to go into parenting. I wasn't sure I would become a parent. I thought I would perpetrate some of the same abuse that was foisted on me. I wasn't certain. And I remember having a conversation when I was in labor, my son, before he entered the planet, saying, I'm going to support you as best I can, and I'm going to be here for you as a human being to human being. And I understand you have your own plan you're coming in with. You have your own experiences that you've chosen. And I am going to support you in that as best you can. And I've always tried to treat him as his own individual being, not an extension of my own being. And I gave him as solid a platform as I could give, and I think it's been helpful.
I think it's no accident that they come into our lives and are exactly what we need at the time. I mean, I always say that about my daughter. I was terrified of being a mother and I never wanted to. I never thought about having children because I did not want to be a parent to a child like I had parented. And when I found out I was pregnant with her, I was terrified. I was excited, but terrified. And then I remember the day my mother's voice came out of my mouth. And I was like, wake up, call. And, and I did so much to try and counter that and make myself a better person and really understand what was going on there and what I needed to deal with. And I think that was her purpose. She was my teacher. I always say that to people. As much as I was her parent, she was my teacher. So, I think we're blessed with these beautiful souls in our life. So, yeah, I think your son will do so well because you've given him the ability to see that you can go through the toughest and still rise again, strong, beautiful, kind, compassionate, and loving. So well done.
Well, and Helen, the same to you and your journey with your daughter and how you've been led to see her transition and her being on the other side now and helping you from that other side so beautifully. That's so impactful when I heard your full story and that you share that so openly with others is such a gift and so beautiful. You didn't have to choose that and that you did. And you're helping all of us as a result of your experience and still have such a beautiful, alive connection is just really meaningful to me.
Thank you. It is pretty special. And she's actually so bossy. I don't think she would ever let me get away with not doing it, to be honest. I used to always remind her, excuse me, remember, I'm the parent here. Oh my gosh, yeah. Yes, so true. And I'm grateful every single day. I'm grateful. I'm grateful that she blessed my life and just gave me the experiences together that we shared so beautifully and grew into. And then now for everything that she's doing from across the veil. I mean, she is such a strong, strong spirit and part of my life still. Yeah, so you talk about miracles too in your life. So I think you're a great believer in those. What advice would you give somebody listening now who is stuck on the treadmill of grief and or trauma and the guilt, the fear, other emotions of going hand in hand with that and really feel stuck?
Yeah. So, first, I want to say the earth is not for the faint of heart and that you're doing a beautiful job walking this planet the way you are. You have beauty and you have worth and you have value and you have purpose. And there's deep purpose in what you've experienced in your life and are experiencing or maybe experiencing at this very moment. And there's value and there's help and there's hope. And I hope that you take it because we need you. There are other people also hurting that you'll be able to help as you take your journey to walk through whatever it is that is facing you in this moment.
Yes. Everyone has a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Ah. That's why I do this. So, your book, Toxic Family Transforming Childhood Trauma and Adult Freedom. As I mentioned, this book is so readable, and I highly recommend it because you take us on this beautiful journey. And off here, I mentioned to you how grateful I am that as I read this book, it was such a balanced account. There was no bitterness towards your parents and what they'd put you through. There was just a healthy appreciation of what they have been through themselves and a deep compassion and understanding of that. And also an awareness that their journeys were not easy as well. And I think that's why everybody needs to read this book of yours, Susan, because it really opens your eyes to what may be happening in your own situation. I saw myself so many times as I was reading your story, and you're just having your beautiful perspective on things. So honest. That's what you are. You're so beautifully honest. At the end of the book, this is a part of Peter, you have each chapter is dedicated to a way of healing that you experienced or went through, and you guide people through this. Talk us through why you decided to add that at the end of your book.
Honestly, it was a throwaway, Helen. I thought everybody knows these things. But then my publisher said, when she read the first draft, she said, you really need to extend these incredible tools in the appendix in the workbook because they're transformational. And I said, oh, don't, everybody knows this, don't they?
No, I'm shaking my head here.
And it has been profound. I moved to Montana. I had a new friend. I had her read The Galley before the book went to print. And she texted me at 7:30 a.m. and she said, I need to come see you, like as soon as possible. And she rang my doorbell at 10 a.m. And she shared with me that she had read a chapter and she did a corresponding exercise in the appendix and sat down to meditate. And it was like things fell into place for her that she never had, even all the puzzle pieces to as a result. And her experience just made everything that I went through, including publishing this book, worth it.
And that's how we don't know how our stories are affecting others and how we can just inspire somebody to take that next step or that first step into a journey that's going to give them the freedom to be authentically themselves, which is, I think, where we're all trying to get, just to be exactly who we want to be. So tell us now about the power of yes.
So a wise mentor once told me, and I love this, that the answer is always yes until it's no. And I have used that and I have shared that and I've seen other people use it and miracles are created. I am probably my own worst saboteur and certainly my own worst critic. And the answer is yes until it's no has helped me so much.
So give us an example of that we can share.
Well, just the book. I mean, in
Yeah.
2007, an Irish seer told me I had this book to write. It was going to help a lot of people. The answer was no. I shoved that under the closest carpet as hard and fast as I could.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm glad I shifted once I heard the answer is yes until it's no, because two other intuitives back to back told me you have a book to write. It's going to help a lot of people. And so the answer became yes.
You actually have several.
You
actually have several to write, don't you?
Oh, shoot. I was going to try to skirt right around that, Helen.
Are you working on anything now?
Well, I'm working on ideas. I was toying a little bit with what it's like to be a super empath and maybe having little mini interviews with lots of people that are empathic and what that means as a collective. So I'm toying with that. I don't know if that's the end, but we'll see.
Yeah. I was in my 40s before I realized that I was highly sensitive, empathic. And what I experienced as a child, I used to walk in the room and exactly what was going on in that room. Who was really angry and annoyed, and I used to feel all these feelings, and they were always foo-foo. It was always rubbish, and it took me a long time to realize that actually I had that all along, and that's why I often didn't feel like I fit in, because everybody was so busy feeling everything I was saying. And I went, oh my gosh, nobody wants to hear my voice. It always seems to be wrong. And here I am. Gosh, what does life look like for you now, Susan?
It's much gentler. I live in a very expansive area. I spent time, a long time in New York City and then on into Los Angeles, and I never thought I'd leave sunny California, but the universe had a reassignment for me to Northwest rural Montana. I live in the number one redneck town in the state, and I'm grateful. There's nothing more healing than nature,
Yeah.
and I feel I deserve it. Even my sister, when she read my book, she said, I had no idea the pain you were in, and I understand why you moved to Montana.
So, so beautiful. And this is why we do this podcast to help people understand no matter what it is you experience or go through, there is a way through it to get to the other side where you can feel calm, where you can feel peace. Most of all, you can feel happiness, and so, so beautiful. So what's the best thing that's happened to you today?
The best thing that's happened to me today is I had a telepathic conversation with my dog. She she keeps
Oh,
she keeps going out on the prairie and she gets full of dust and dirt and she loves it. She's earthing. The horses do it
mhm,
now too. And especially with the frequencies that are pounding the
yeah.
planet, they need to ground and earth. But, and I have to comb her off and sometimes I have to wash her off. And so she doesn't quite like it or understand it. So about an hour before our conversation, I just looked right into her eyes and I had a whole conversation telepathically with her, and she responded. I could feel it, I could sense it, and it was just like I was 7 years old talking to one of my dogs again, confiding to them.
Oh,
It's lovely. So,
I
that was the best
so
thing.
believe that. And
Yeah.
animals are our greatest healers as well, aren't they? That just total and absolute unconditional love that they give us. Oh, just warmed my heart right there. Something that you are most grateful for.
Oh, my breath and my health and the ability to speak with honesty. This is a taboo topic that I'm bringing to the forefront, and I'm grateful I have the strength and the courage to take this taboo top of toxic family lineage and dissolve it.
Yes, I'm grateful too. Just share with us because you mentioned breath, and I want you to share with us that really simple, effective breath work that you do that will just allow us just to calm our systems down and center us.
It's one of the tools that's in the workbook, and I love it because it's so simple and easy. So you take your hand, either right or left, it doesn't matter, and put it on your solar plexus, which is at the top of your rib cage, just below your breastbone. Take a breath in and let it go. And you could take another or a couple and then either gently to yourself, silently, or out loud verbally say, I am okay. I'm really okay. And just that always brings me right back, calms my central nervous system, takes me off that hamster wheel I'm running my darndest on. And it's just so easy. So, yeah, it's a takeaway.
That is a beautiful tool, so simple and effective, and we can do it anywhere, anytime. So, oh, thank you for that. And I don't know whether this is one of your go-tos, but when you have moments in your day that turn to custard, what are some of the things that help you pivot out of that?
Yeah. I breathe in faith and I blow out fear and I trust it's all for higher purpose.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Because I think sometimes we can stand in our own way, and when we just trust and relax, just let the universe do show us its miracles, really certainly comes through and does that for us. Susan, I again, I am just so inspired by the work you have done the work you are doing, what you're sharing with this world to make it such a better, more beautiful place. It's already pretty beautiful when we choose to look at it that way. But the work you are doing is so needed and so valuable. And I am so grateful that you took the time to share that today.
I'm so glad our souls collided, and keep up your amazing work, Helen. I'm going to keep tabs on you.
Thank you so much, Susan. You take good care. That